into our next hour and a little bit together. I have this much to say, but I'll say this much. And we do have 2 activities to do at your tables and a couple of little short film clips along the way as well, which are more of the IKEA brand, you'll see, because they're made by me. So before we really get going, I have an uncomfortable question for you, which is, what makes you uncomfortable? And you know, I'm even uncomfortable being asked that. I'll just tell you, and I want you to think about that in the context of going to an organisation or a place or having to interact with some institution or thing that you're not familiar with. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. When I was 20, I was travelling around Australia, just like my own daughter is right now, and sick of campfire cooking, we thought we'd go to a pub and have a pub meal. The size of the pub was probably the size of this platform. I opened the door. It was full of blokes who stopped talking, looked at me. The door had a dartboard on it. Anyway, I was uncomfortable. A quite different context, I turned 50 relatively recently, I have to say. Birthday cards, Australian government sent you a letter, and a little bowel screening kit. Uncomfortable. It took till the reminder one came up, and I'm a public health person, I think screening's really important, but So this is not an icebreaker. I don't want you to share your uncomfortable experiences, but I do want you to, because there's plenty of paper and stuff, I'd just like you to write a couple of words down that describe what made you uncomfortable when you had to deal with some organisation or institution. You will not be asked to share, just write it down. Actually, with smaller groups, I have asked people not to share, but I've just asked them to write it on a post-it note, and I've grabbed it at the end, and I've been compiling it. And it's really interesting what groups of professionals, I'm from Swinburne Uni, what the associate professors and professors, they talk about being overwhelmed. They feel patronised, they feel vulnerable, they feel fear, anxiety. Lots of things make us really uncomfortable. And so, that was my icebreaker without breaking the ice, so to say. So today's workshop, as you've seen, is called Unlocking the Value of Local Connections and talking about community connectors and relationship-based engagement. So what do I mean about that? So what I want to do is take us through, in the next 20 minutes or so, just a way for you to think about the place where you work, where you operate as an engagement practitioner. And I'm going to introduce not a lot of jargon, but the terms of boundaries and boundary spanning. Because they are the things that can often make us very uncomfortable. And then look at, well, who spans these boundaries? And interestingly, this morning from Julia, she talked about community champions. Well, I'm going to be talking about community connectors. And then I want to talk about how you find them, how you relate with them, and then together you will have identified, do some thinking about that, and come up with your own sort of take-home messages. And if we're really brave, to add another degree of difficulty, I wouldn't mind filming just a couple of you saying really cool, short to the point things standing near each of those questions. So that's how we'll put it together at the end. And if the app works, the app will tell us stuff. And if it doesn't work, but it will because Ray is awesome. But if it doesn't, we can still write stuff and put it on the wall. So we're going to gather stuff. I'm going to gather stuff out of you one way or another. Because I'm a researcher, I love data. But we all do. It tells a story. So why I'm here and why I'm telling you about connectors and boundary spanning is because that I have had, and if you are ever feeling really stressed and crazy at work, go and do a PhD. It is fun. If you have a good topic. So the research I've been doing for the last 2.5 years was started off by a small rural health service actually approached Swinburne Uni and said, we have some really high unfortunately the wrong end of the scale of health needs and issues. We have great programs and services. There are people in our community who are still hardly reached by our services. It's really frustrating. But we know there's some people in our community who are very well connected to some of these groups and doing some really awesome stuff and actually sometimes starting some really interesting activities, programs, all kinds of things. Or not even formal things, but they are connecting people up. They're spanning all these cultural boundaries, these social boundaries. Are there more often? Can we work with them? What does that look like? So what I have worked on is 2 case studies in that area and then over in rural Ireland as well, basically looking for community connectors. Who are they? What do they do? Why do they do it? Are there health benefits? How do we measure that? Are they amenable to working or relating a bit more with the local health service? So this has started with a problem, health services, people hardly reached, find the connectors. What I have then done is turn that into a framework with a sort of operating model tucked inside it, and that's really what I'm talking about today. But I think it's good for you to know it started from a health thing, but really it's quite applicable to how do we relate our public sector services to the community. So this diagram, a lot of you are nodding, you would probably have seen something like this. I actually did a subject called Governance and Civil Society about 10 years ago. I didn't even know what that meant actually, going into it. But this came up, that's how our lecturer put those first 3 things up. And I've just found that a really useful way to think about the place where you are. You've got the business sector, you've got the public sector, and you've got the community sector. You can frame a place in all kinds of ways, but we are the International Association of Public Participation, so, how does the public sector engage with civil society? And so there are the 2 circles I'm kind of focusing on today. So I'm pretty interested actually who's in the room from the public sector. Who have we got here from education? Oh, a lot, not many, okay, cool. Who have we got here from health? My buddies, nice to see you. What about environment? Oh, there must be some other enviro workshop going on. Justice? What else? Local government? A few of you guys. State government, BODs? Yep. Transport? Housing? Community services? Family services, that sort of stuff? Who have I missed? Did anyone go, oh, you haven't said my public sector thing? Yeah, what are you guys?
Commonwealth, disability.
Oh, yeah, fine, good.
Agriculture.
Yep. Sorry, ladies, to forget you guys.
Water.
Yes, yep. I guess I was kind of going environment is maybe all of that. Yeah, and someone else?
Media.
Oh, great, excellent. So, what we're going to talk about today is boundaries to start with. So, I find the construct of boundaries a really useful one. All boundaries are, obviously a fence is a boundary, but boundaries are markers of difference, and they help us to define what's in and what's out, who I am, who you are, what is this organisation, what is that organisation, what is this sector, what is that sector. They're very important for defining groups, individuals, entities, but of course they can cause exclusion. And as you reflected on this morning, some of those boundaries can make us feel really uncomfortable and at times mean that we're reluctant to engage, we're not amenable to opportunities that might be in front of us. I'm not going to give you a lecture on boundaries, social culture, whatever, but I think it's useful to think about, we know about our organisational boundaries, generally they're clear cut. But if you're then thinking about, well, how does the public sector interact with the community sector, there's some stuff going on in community space where there's social boundaries. That's how we categorise people: age, gender, income status, education, employment, those recognisable social boundaries. They're kind of underpinned by cultural boundaries. And they are sort of, how we talk, what we wear, where we hang out, which cafe we go to, which pub we go to, which pub we never go to, what sport we play. And they're kind of interrelated as well, and it's useful to understand some of those cultural boundaries in our community as well as the social boundaries. Physical boundaries, I suppose we do get our heads around those a bit more, those things about how something looks, can you walk into it, through it, see it, ring it, know it's there, those sorts of ways of defining something's actual physicality. So I talked at the start about some community connectors. Now this is not the ultimate, oh fine, we've got community connectors, now we can engage with all the hardly reached people, job done. It's not that simple or clear cut, but it is, they do exist, and it certainly as part of my case studies I interviewed 32 community connectors, aging from ages 37 to 83, men, women, And very much as Julie was talking about this morning, people who are motivated by a love of their place and wanting to see interactions and activity in their place. And so the way I'm kind of defining community connectors are, they're the sort of community members who not only know what's going on, but they know who's missing out, who's not participating, who's a bit sitting off to the edge, and they're the ones who will do something to actually proactively include people or connect people, either with other people or with things or with resources or whatever it is that they might need. So I bet you, and while this has started off as a research project, it's now developed into a framework that we can use. And I've actually lived in Castlemaine in central Victoria for the last 17 years and been very involved in community life there and our local health services. So we actually had a process recently where we got our community health, our community house, hospital and council to come together, and we thought, how would we find our local connectors? And so we've actually done that. We've rounded them up, so to say, and started some conversations. So we knew who we were looking for. But I'd be interested if anyone here is able to think of and just describe someone you know in your own community who's a community connector. What do they? Don't have to say their name, but just what is it about them that makes them a connector? So you're nodding, Barbara.
They mow the old lady's lawns next door.
Yeah, okay, so that's a great one. So mowing the lawns of the lady next door. And just then you kind of just knowing how she's going too, and there's a bit more stuff that goes on with that. Yeah. Any other people know some local connectors? Think of some in their community? Yeah?
Hang on, we just
roving mic. Oh, yes.
Roving mic.
Thank you, Amber.
Because all these sessions are recorded, it's great to actually have you use the microphone throughout.
Great, thank you. So it's a woman who is the chairperson of the PNC at the local primary school, who, having finished that role, then joined the board of the local community organisation. She's got kids that play sport and she gets engaged in that, and she, through all those different roles, attempts to bring in people who would perhaps not. She also works in disability, and so she has always attempted to bring in those people who don't necessarily feel that civic role is their place.
Yeah, it's that bringing in that's
So
the
actively
thing.
engaging.
So it's going beyond being a community leader, it's having that ability to then
Can I
draw
just say though that sometimes people do say unpleasant things about people like that and call them busybodies?
They do, and that came up in quite a bit of the research. And I heard a nice one, I can see if I can remember, she said, I wouldn't call her a go-between person, I'd call her a go-to person. So, yes, you're quite right. You've really got to know what you're playing with when you get into this personal, interpersonal space. So, where am I up to? Yeah, so if an organisation, so okay, you've got boundaries, you've got people who do cross these and are those community connectors. If you are a local organisation, I know you've got Commonwealth players here too, so how this plays out on a macro and micro scale is something to talk about as well. How do you find them? How do you connect with them, and how do you enable some sort of connection? So, because I've got a broken thing, a very simple way I've just been describing it, we used this in Castlemaine actually, when we just said, well, this is our shire of Mount Alexander Shire. These are the local organisations. Here's our community, lots of formal and informal groups, and people who are not really a part of anything, but we know there are these connector types who can kind of, like the woman you mentioned from Yorktown, who do that work. So what we were talking about is, well, how, if there are people in organisations who have the time and the availability, the permission, the roles, to actually find the connectors in their community, how do you even find them? How do you, on what basis would they want to connect with you, and what can you do to support the work that they're doing in their community, and what do they offer back to you? So that's what we were kind of looking at. So it's really kind of like making that, filling in that little missing piece of the puzzle, because connectors do have relationships with people that are hard to reach through our engagement processes. They do have local knowledge. the community and all the different boundaries within that and the nuances within that. They do understand health or other issues, but not all of them do have a relationship with the public sector. So just to go back to the sample I originally had of those 32 people, about 24 of them had some sort of connection with the local public sector, but all of them said they would like to have a better connection with the particularly with health and community services. But not like holus bolus, not like, oh, here's my phone number, give it to all of the staff. It was on things that were of interest and value to them. So it's how do you complete that picture? So just to kind of how I've been representing that is to really, I think the point of having a framework is it's just a handy way of representing some ideas. I reflect on my own practice life. Obviously we all use the IAP2 spectrum. That's one of those kind of go-to things that just helps us explain a concept. Because I've worked in local government, and the Victorians here will know the environments for health framework. So you think about built natural, social, economic environments. It's just handy. Or if you work in mental health promotion, you think about, okay, the 3 drivers of mental health are freedom from discrimination and violence, economic participation, social inclusion. So I was thinking, okay, what's a simple way to conceptualise this approach? So that's what this framework does. Now, it is a work in progress. I've had people say, oh, it should be circular, maybe there should be a cog in the middle to show that you keep moving. It's not a static process. Connectors come and go. Their availability and interest changes. Staff come and go. So it does need to keep moving. It's not just, oh, we found our 10 most useful connectors, they're there forever. Well, no, they're not. But so it has to be an ongoing process. So really what I've said is, well, just start to think about, unpack your context in terms of the different boundaries. Think about some of those boundaries that make people uncomfortable. And recognise that there are connectors who cross those boundaries. And actually, they might be you as well, because we're not just staff all the time, we're people as well. So, staff often are connectors as well, or they know the connectors. So you've got to remember that. And then, okay, how do you find your local connectors if you work in some sort of public sector body? And then if you're actually changing staff time or changing staff roles to allow these relationships to develop and be managed and maintained, then you would hope that you're starting to see some benefits for the individuals who've been partly reached and connected, for the connectors themselves, and for your organisation, and maybe for the community at large. Monitoring and evaluation is crucial, and these sorts of things, it is hard to join the dots between us having more time here means better outcomes, but we need to find ways to measure that, and that's something I've started looking at. So I do have just a very short clip to describe just to give a bit more colour and movement, I suppose, to what I mean by connectors. So let's have a look at that and see. And we had volume working quite recently. Yeah. And as I said, this is an idea film made on my little Oppo phone and edited with Hit Film Express, which if you're into filmmaking, I really encourage you to take that challenge up, because it's, how you go, oh, anyone can make a film, they're on YouTube all the time, but editing is more of a fine art than I realised, but it's such a good way to bring a situation or a context to life. Anyway, you also, what I will do is write, my website is written down on that sheet of paper that's on your table, and it's boundariespanning.net. So there's links to all these little film clips anyway. So you've seen some of the connectors in action, and in that film there was a men's shed social group. This was Ireland. They were a men's shed without a shed, which I thought was a bit funny. There was a knitting group in the local library. There was a school garden that was established by one of the parents. There was, what else was going on in that film? Oh, a woman who set up a street feast for neighbours who were new to the town. So all kinds of activities there. So that's my kind of truncated version of what I'm talking about by community connectors, and that the fact that they do cross lots of social and cultural boundaries in your community. Boundaries that mean that people are hardly reached and often not engaging in participation opportunities. And also I just want to say to that, not everyone wants to participate all the time anyway. And that came up a lot too. So the busybodies thing came up a bit, but so did well, if people don't want to engage, good luck to them. And if they don't want to go to the service, they shouldn't have to. Well, that's true too. But often there are, we all do this a bit. We go from, I'm not doing it, bow screen test, no, to, all right, I've thought about it and I'll do it. And so, again, it's relationships and knowledge and those things can sometimes shift people's comfort levels and willingness or even interest to benefit from the service or the opportunity that we provided. So, now from this, looking at, oh, there we go, I've got a good sound, but that's all right. There's another film to come. We'll get the sound going in that one. What I want you to do is think about, well, if I was doing this, because you can come away from conferences and go, oh yeah, community connectors, that sounds really good. How do we do it? Where are they? How do we find them? So the way I've approached it is to go, well, so for example, what we did in Castlemaine was, when I mentioned we got the local health and community services together, we actually got a bigger whiteboard than that. We actually we thought about who are some of the hardly reached groups in our community, or who would we really love to kind of be more in touch with and more aware of their health needs. And we wrote all those groups up. So it was we know our community. So it was the people retiring in the hot rod clubs. It's the people involved with, there was a sort of fallout between two radio stations. So the people who with this one, the people with that one. It'd be, oh, there's a particular footy club we can never get to. Yeah, that'd be great. Oh, someone's running a Facebook page for single mums. Yeah, if we could come across them, that'd be great. Who's doing the library story? So we started to come up with this list of groups and connectors we thought we knew. Or we had to do it in layers too, because we didn't know all of the connectors, but we knew someone who would know a connector. So someone from the local newspaper, or they would know how to get us there. And that's exactly the same approach I've used in my work, was to go into a town and go, well, I have a research relationship with the local service here, but if you go online, it's not that hard to find who's the mayor, who's the CEO of the council, who's the school principals, who's the president of the Small Traders Association, who's the president of the local sports club. And those people often are not connectors, but they know who they are. And so that's been my way of getting in, and that seems quite effective. So that's what I want you to do now, is you've got 15 minutes. I'm one of those people now, I find myself more and more often at restaurants going, huh, what? Oh, so would you put that music, would you turn it down? So I find whole table discussions can be tricky. So I think I'm really encouraging you just to work in pairs at your table. I think that will work better for this exercise. And what I'd like you to do is, you can do, just between you can do your own, just go, oh, your situation is more interesting than mine, let's talk about yours. Or let's do me and do you. So you choose. But I want you to think about the place where you conduct your engagement activities. Now, if you're the Commonwealth Government, you can't know all of the little connectors across Australia. Like, that is a no can do. So maybe it's thinking a bit more, draw the, how you change the screen, pull it back and go, well, maybe you're not looking for community connectors. Maybe you're looking for connector organisations. So you might just have to change the framework when you're thinking about this to what is the scale and the scope of your work. But really, it's not until you kind of think about this stuff and talk about it, you go, oh, this could work, or this won't work. And that's what I want you to start playing with. So 15 minutes, I'm going to rove around and just film you guys in action if you don't mind. If anyone doesn't want to be filmed, I think we've all sort of talked about that. And then I'll show you a short film after that of interviews with some connectors that I met up with in Australia last year. So there are 3 questions. So basically, I want you to, maybe if I go back, yes. So the questions are really around these 3 things. How would you find connectors? And I put some prompts. How would you connect with them? And I put some prompts. Turn the page over. This is a 2-pager. And what would make this work? So I'm not going to do a whole of group feedback because everyone's situation is so different. But this is for you to start to nut it out. Before we go, are there any questions or issues or problems with this? Fantastic. So a lot of conversations, and I think like anything, it's going from concept to practice. So, great idea in theory, Carolyn, that's fantastic, but I don't have the organisational support, the time, the whatever. And those are real and not trivial issues and realities. And we have our own boundaries, our own organisational boundaries that are sometimes quite big and sometimes maybe a bit more in our minds than we think too. So one of the things I obviously asked a lot of people is if you already do have a connection with the local service, why is that and how's that working? And what would it take to make it work? So let's have another go at watching another film. This is a 4-minute one.
If you work for a health or community service organisation and you know there's people in your community hardly reach by your services, maybe it's time to try a new approach to engagement. Why not find the community members who are motivated to build community life and wellbeing, who also have relationships with groups your organisation is not engaging with? Great potential can be unlocked if people from health and community services find and connect with their local connectors. Here's some examples of what connectors do, why they do it, and their views on being more connected with health services. I guess I'm just getting involved in the community with my children, I guess, and just doing what I can to help the organisations that they're in. And I guess with that comes the same people popping up in the groups and recognising new faces to town. So I guess you're that familiar point of contact where you can introduce yourself and let them know what's going on.
The men come down here to the men's shed, and it's a great thing for men who are on their own. Great thing for men that are out of work.
I guess the main motivation is I want to help people, and I want to see people. I guess it's like equity to see. It's not about everyone getting the same thing. It's about people getting what they need, and sometimes that's just a process of removing barriers and obstacles in their way. So I guess I love people.
I feel like I connect to people that I can see are a bit that have a need. And I'm not sure what motivates me. It's just I'm from here. I feel like I'm a representative of the area, and so I should. It's a way of giving back, of taking care of some people.
And I know most of the men. I know they all come from different social groups, and some of them may be bowlers or golfers or all sorts of other occupations. And they work together, which gives me a real buzz to see them working together.
I don't know, I just feel like I've had a lot of support in the community and just letting people know what's available. I just think the benefits that I've had is being able to offer that to other people.
I would feel a bit chuffed about that, especially to be approached. I think that would be really nice that someone recognised that I had a strength for a way of doing things that they could utilise for good. That would be, I'd be chuffed.
I think it'd be a positive idea and benefits both ways, obviously, knowing what's on in the community, being able to connect people in.
But I think building those relationships or using someone who's got those relationships would be the easiest way to go about it.
Mental health, men's mental health. Men, of course, don't admit to that, but that was a good experience. As a chap from the doctor service, we welcome all sorts of people to talk to us.
I see it as being beneficial to people, that it's a no-brainer.
I feel like the flow-on could be massive in any direction. People, the obvious ones where people will be less disconnected, there'll be crossovers in any and all of the groups, so that if you don't know someone somewhere, then you know someone who does.
Such awesome people, aren't they? And it's always hard when you've spent so much time with people to learn about what they do and what motivates them, to condense that into a simple, compelling story, but really they spoke for themselves. So we're romping along through this session. We've got about 20 minutes left. I'd like to have we've got time now for some questions and observations from you guys. And then what I'd like to do is I have 4 questions back for you, which we, technology permitting, will do through our wonderful app. Technology not permitting, we'll write the answers up and stick them on the wall, and I'll take a photo of them. And that's how we'll play out. So you've now had a chance to kind of go, what does this mean for us? Actually, Amber just pointed out a couple of questions that she would have straight away, which is the practicality. So, for example, when we went about doing this in Castlemaine, we actually had a reason for wanting to, we actually wrote a little script that we all used when we rang, because we rang the connectors that we knew, so we weren't just cold calling someone. And we had quite a simple script to say, look, we're very interested in having better connections with more groups in the community. We know you're really part of X group, and would you be interested in coming along to a connector forum that we're hosting, where we just wanted to explore issues and needs and opportunities in the community. And we had a 2-pager that talked about what we're doing, what we think, what connectors are, why we think you're a connector, and what might be the benefits for you and for us. So that information is actually, I've taken all our logos out, but on the website boundariespanning.net, you can scroll through. This is a new website, I'm still playing with it, but as I use stuff in real life, outside of the research part of it, I'm chucking those resources on there. So that stuff is actually on there, and you can click and find those templates and that sort of thing. So if you had that question, I've now answered that. But other questions or observations I'd really appreciate. We'll chuck this around.
Yeah, absolutely. So chucking this around and opening up to the group. Great, we've got a question over here. Let's go. No.
What sort of formats are you able to represent from taking lived experience and converting back into research, planning, speak, client jargon and statistics that you're wanting to see at the other end? How do you go about translating everyday people and their stories and the value of what they're telling you?
I think that is a really hard question to answer. And I think you've got to kind of bound a bit and just go, well, what is a particular issue that we're interested in or an opportunity? So you've got to then take it down to, were we interested in reducing social isolation in our community, for example? So to what extent, who did we talk to about that? What instances did we uncover? What new opportunities did we find? You know, walking groups, coffee clubs, whatever. And then you start to do then you sort of go into the monitoring evaluation world. So maybe it's using a combination of case studies, but also it is, I think, useful to say, you know, we have actually reached 20 more individuals than we had previously. We have now recruited X number more into our, and I'm sorry, I'm sort of lapsing into health world, but you know, our diabetes or our carers group, or our, you know, 2 more people have actually signed up to be on canteen duty in high school. The metrics have to be determined by the local situation. You don't really know what you're looking for until you start to see the change, and then you've got to jump on it and count it. Yeah. Great.
I guess I'm really interested in the difference between this working out in a rural situation, country town versus a city. I grew up in a country town, and I can really see how this plays out easily. But after moving to Sydney, I'm sort of, have there been differences, and how has that played out?
Yeah. So there's that's the highs and lows of when you're doing PhD research. It's got to be original contribution to knowledge. Then if you find something that looks awfully like what you're doing, you go, oh. Well, and so if you look up a thing called Smart Urban Intermediaries, their nickname is SUIs, which I don't think is totally friendly, but SUI, Smart Urban Intermediaries. So there's some really interesting, that is a multi-country research project. It's Canada, some European places, and I forget where else. So check them out, because this is all about applying the same kind of thing but in an urban setting. Because I've, in my, the focused time and energy that I've had, 2 case studies were all I could accommodate. So it was either do a rural metro or go rural, but go a different country. So that's what I've done. However, because I posted something on LinkedIn, I think, a metro community health service has become a really good buddy and partner of mine, and we're actually applying it with their organisation. and they have already surfaced a bunch of connectors through a community leadership program that's out in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And the work I did with that group were actually encouraging them to think, well, you're connectors, but how much are you connecting into the public sector? So that was really about equipping these well-connected community members to start to think about what are these boundaries to get back in, and what can you do to be more, to even understand how to work with this sector and to be kind of proactive and constructive in that space. So long answer, but thank you. Yeah, sure.
My name's Derry, I'm from Northern Territory, and I'm just looking at this from a governance perspective.
Yeah.
To engage with any community organisation, it's got to be driven from somewhere. And so from the public sector and the health sector, you've got the imperative sector to deliver. And I'm not in that sector, I'm in an industry-based organisation. And a couple of others that actually have a vision, that's why they're set up. They're actually service providers, training or industry relationships. Without the vision, to start with a mission, you don't have a purpose. And you've got to actually have your purpose. And that purpose then is driven by the objectives that you have in your organisation. To achieve the outcomes, it's an observation, to achieve the outcomes in engagement, you have that purpose, but you actually have to have the organisation engaged with the right people and the right reasons, and actually support them in that engagement, and then give them the tasks. And so, I think at the level we're talking about here is that I know unlocking the value of the local connections, but you've got to get there somehow to start with. And I think having the organisational structures and drivers and everybody owning that, I think is a really important element in achieving that engagement.
And there's also layers to how an organisation faces and presents, aren't there? So I guess I'm looking at the really micro-social sort of stuff, and some of those more hidden, less obvious relationships that can occur between an institution and individuals, and those connectors that are the sort of mediators between those potential relationships. So in terms of mission, I mean, that's certainly when we looked in what is, we all love this place, what is it about this that makes us want to work together, to share resources. And also I think what I've started to think a lot about now is the difference between episodic engagement or access versus relational engagement and relational. And this is the underlying, it's sort of like the glue, and that is the thing that builds trust. Because if there are more relationships with more people, genuine listening, dialogue, understanding, then when something more pointy like a new strategic something or a new inclusion something, you've actually got more authentic and a wider range of relationships. So it's sort of that underlying glue that we're kind of looking at spreading around. That's a good way to describe it. I'll take maybe two more questions, then I'm going to chuck my questions back at you. So yes.
Thank you. My question comes from the private sector perspective. Have you had any situations or challenges where a connector is perceived by their peers as selling out or being sort of bought over by their involvement?
I can think of some. So the places I've really scrutinised this are 4 different towns, 2 in Western Victoria and 2 in Southern Ireland. And some tricky stuff. There was a connector in Ireland who, so there are large corporations that have landed in this particular part of the country because of tax laws and blah, blah, blah. And so they are like, oh, we're here to do our corporate service related stuff. And, oh, we've come to paint the kinder. Oh, we actually don't want the kinder painted today or tomorrow, but we do want you to do this thing. And so there was a connector who got caught in the, sort of a bit caught in the crossfire of that, but had the ability to then, he was a long-term resident. So that's the other thing, not all connectors are long-term people. This guy was, and knew the lay of the land and knew enough of the public players and the private players to actually get a better result out of that particular instance, so that's one example I can think of. But yeah, it does get complicated, and I think today I've simplified the presentation by just going public sector, community, how do you do that? But the reality is much more nuanced. Yeah, you're right. Just one last question and then I'm going to give you my questions. I'll give you my questions now. Cool.
Probably not a question,
Yeah.
but just a statement that,
Can I?
Oh yeah. Good catch.
just a statement that the connectors there all had a common connection or a common cohort they were with.
Yes.
So, which I think we do naturally well in in community and in Australia. So
Yes.
we have great connections and establishment networks in 0 to 6 year olds.
Yeah.
We have, then there's the work around the retirees, so the men's shed.
Yeah.
The children who may be active or involved in an activity and have a family who can support that,
Yeah.
then get some connection, or families get connections that way.
Yeah.
But I suppose my observation is we need to do more for the cohort that are over 6 and up to 65 who aren't necessarily engaged in a workplace or engaged in education, but need connection. And I think sometimes they're the forgotten community and the forgotten, and they're the hard to reach people to connect with.
Yeah.
So
They don't come fit neatly under a
they
banner.
they don't fit under a banner. They may be, socio-economically challenged and don't have access to, put their 3 kids in the soccer club, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But we really need to establish some other forms of community and that connect the network to support people from older than 6 and younger than 65. I think we do it well pre and we do it post, but in between it's sort of like the busyness of school and
But
life.
I think
and
to
work.
challenge that, not all of I think it's interesting, we do lapse into, as service providers, we have to make all this stuff happen, but it turns out the connectors are doing a lot of this stuff. And I actually have numerous examples of connectors that I've interviewed in great depth and detail who are doing exactly that work with that middle cohort, and it is the people who are new to town, the mum who hasn't gone out for 7 years because her partner died and various things, and who sees the guy that just catches the bus into town every day, sits on the same chair, talks to no one, who are you, I'm actually going to talk to you. So these connectors are not easy to find because they're not wearing the connector sign either, and it is through that local gradual understanding of getting into the layers that you're talking about in a community. And I came across a really great article recently talking about layers of vulnerability. Going back to what makes us all uncomfortable, we are all vulnerable and uncomfortable at different points for different reasons that aren't just defined by disability, age, economic status. It can be a whole bunch of things. So we need to be a lot more nuanced and not just go, oh, you fit the marginalised group, so we're a bit too hard and fast, I think. So thank you for your insight and your comments. I really appreciate all of that. If you do take home that sheet of paper, you'll find a link to the website where over the next 6 months or longer, hopefully, I'll keep adding more things as I come up with more practical resources. And to pick up on Barbara's point, the bit that's missing there is some really useful stuff about measuring the impact. I'm actually from the Centre for Social Impact. I think I'd be all over it, but work in progress. I've still got another 6 months to go, so that's all right. So my questions to you are, that's the film, keep going. Yep, on the activity, seeing the film. Looking good. Here's my questions. So if you have a smartphone, iPad, whatever thing, and if you just go into your browser and write, and it doesn't have to be capitals, you just write polev.com /Carol Wallace up on there. And all I have to do is escape this, go to my other screen, and if you type responses in, they'll come up. I just want to see if this works. I'm the sort of person who has people around to dinner and tries new recipes on them. So you're my dinner guests, and I'm trying out a new souffle on you. So let's see. Put the address. So the address is on the top of that whiteboard there. If anyone's typing. I actually haven't tried this outside of the room. time? Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Has anyone actually hit enter on a thing?
Question.
Rightio.
So we're in, but it doesn't, we can't seem to register. And then
There you go.
But hey, you know what?
You know
Let's
what?
go old
That's
school.
why we've got plan B.
Let's go old school. Let's ask these questions and let's,
Yeah, chuck a few around.
yeah.
All right. So, I mean, the first one is about what would your organisation gain from working with connectors? Do you see any benefit? If you were to go back after this conference and say, oh, I went to this workshop, another way of thinking about people that are hardly reached is finding local connectors. I reckon we should do it because, what kind of benefits do people think might be possible? Yeah.
I'm getting Dobby and Rachel sitting here who shared a story with us in our conversation.
Yeah.
And
Oh, can we just throw the mic at you, please?
I think it's really valuable for the group to hear how they use local connectors.
Yep. Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I was sharing a story about a project we did a while back in Shepparton.
Yep.
Future was the name of it. And if anybody from Victoria, you might remember the Plug the Pipeline project, where it was very contentious. People were handcuffing themselves to their properties. It was very, very contentious during the drought, where they were trying to build a pipeline to Melbourne. And the Premier at the time got locked into a town hall, so it was quite contentious. So we were the sister project coming in. We were doing all the channel lining, all the infrastructure to save water, and we were also changing from the manual systems of irrigation to a computerised system, and asking each farmer to change the way that they irrigated at a time when we were in drought and we had 38% allocation of water. So when I went in to do the reconnaissance trip, I went into a local cafe, as you do, because you're sort of searching around and you're digging for information and trying to find out who's who. And the barista made my coffee, spat in it, gave it to me and said, "We don't want you here."
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a really contentious project.
Yeah.
So what we did, we went away and we thought, how can we do this differently? How can we make sure there's dignity and how can we connect with locals? So we actually went out and we asked for farmers who had fallen on hard times, either lost their properties or their farms, or they weren't getting a significant income from their property anymore, who were very concerned about the region and believed in it.
Yeah.
And we asked them to come to the office and talk about whether they would be community engagement representatives for us. So we found about 12 farmers in the end, and not all farmers. Some of them were people who lost businesses because of the region wasn't doing very well.
Yeah.
And we trained them in community engagement practice, put them through the certificate, and then we made sure that they were very supported and enabled. And we put a program together where we actually sent them out to talk to farmers. And it took probably between 3 and 12 face-to-face meetings. But to cut a long story short, so we were very involved in the region. We had the farmers talking to farmers. We also had a really significant ground sort of roots projects and getting in touch with people in the area in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
But in the end, after 2 years, we had 99.7% of farmers sign on for the change, which was
There's benefit to the
extraordinary.
organisation. Yeah,
It was an
wow.
extraordinary project and an extraordinary result by using relationships and connectors and just looking back and looking at legacy and having positive relationships and looking at what can we leave behind as well.
Thank you. That's a really powerful story, and I appreciate you sharing that. But it's time, it's local knowledge, it's doing things differently, isn't it? And actually recognising the skill set of other people, the non-professionals. So that's one question. Let me maybe just get out of this and go back into my PowerPoint, might be better, because that's not me, it's being a bugger. That's all right. So there's 4 more questions. Where's my presentation? Oh, thank you. Cool, yeah, those questions. The next one I wanted you to think about is, so that's the reason why you would engage with connectors, because you can see the benefit, but What would prevent your organisation from engaging with connectors? So you go back and go, hey, this would be really great for us, we should do this, and then your boss, colleague, whatever is going to go, that won't work because blah.
Show me the evidence this will work.
Yeah, evidence. Definitely. So important. Time is a big one. And yes and no, actually. It's sort of interesting what I've sort of observed is actually using time differently and spending time in other ways. So, but time is used as one for sure. Other things it might prevent.
Budget.
Yeah, and budget is linked to time to a degree, isn't it, quite often? So they're kind of interconnected. And not just, funding guidelines and KPIs and those sorts of things, you have to do certain things. So partly what I'm starting to now write up in the final bit is, further evidence of impact, but also some arguments to then say, well, we should change funding guidelines, we should actually incentivise things, we should be measuring not just the number of relationships, but the value and the outputs from relationships.
Perception of bias?
Yeah, sure.
Perception of bias.
That captive thing, so, which is you've gone from one set of usual suspects to another set of usual suspects, potentially. That's what could be another question. This final thing, this other one I've come up with is just to be a connector-friendly organisation, because, our organisational boundaries of language, protocol, dress code, availability, all those things, they need to be a challenge so that we are connector-friendly organisations. So when those awesome community leaders from the eastern suburbs I spoke to about, hey, how do you connect into the public sector? If there are connector-friendly organisations, it's going to be easier. So that's another one I think I would want challenge you to think about is what you need to change to be connector-friendly. What does that look like? Hard one to answer on the spot. And we are running out of time too, because we have to finish at 12:30, is that correct?
Yeah, so we've got 11 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry, but yeah.
You need to be fluid and flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. Fluid and flexible, and that then is a bit more informed by the culture of the organisation too. Absolutely. Because this is a bit about, you're not going out to engage with a purpose. It's not an engagement question. There's not a decision to be made. It's just, who are you? What are you up to? What's going on in the lives of the people you connect with? When you're out walking the dogs on the golf course or bringing the people along to the community lunch or whatever it is. That's the question. Yeah.
I was going to say a willingness to be a little less risk averse and prepared to not have total control of the message.
So scary. We don't like losing control. It's like, here's the engagement, we've worked it out. This is actually letting go of control. Yeah, definitely. So they'll actually put that into two layers, because it's what you need in your own practice and then what your organisation needs to do. That flexibility and that letting go applies to both the individual and the organisation. What I'd like to do to wrap up is, this is always tricky because we all want to bolt for lunch, but I would really love it if a couple of people each went and stood by one of those 4 signs, because they would be happy to stand in front of it, and then as they answer the question, I can just film your response, because then I can edit it into a little 1-minute film that we can chuck on the IAP2 conference website or whatever, and there's a very short record of some of the points we pulled out from our session today. So if you are willing to stay back for 5 minutes and stand in front of one of those, that would be awesome. And what I would like to do, just so I know there's a couple of people planning to stay back so I can film them, is there anyone who'd be interested, sorry, I'll talk to this, to stay and answer what would your organisation gain from engaging with connectors? So I just want like a 1 or 2 sentence response, that's all I want. Anyone willing to be filmed answering that one? Thank you. I've got at least 1 customer, and if I have 2, that's better. Anyone willing to stand in front of what would prevent you from engaging with connectors? Anyone happy to talk about time, money, that sort of thing? That's a bit of a downer of a question anyway. What about anyone who wants to talk about being a connector-friendly organisation, or you being connector-friendly? Anyone want to talk about that? Any willing customers? From the chef. All right. Yeah. Good. Max. So I'm just going to fill my 3 people while the rest of you bolt out to lunch. And thank you so much for your time and participation.